This is Join Us in France, episode 15. Hello, I'm Annie.
And I'm Elise.
And we welcome you to the Join Us in France Travel podcast. Elise is a professional tour guide, art historian, and a really good storyteller.
A professional talker.
On today's show, we dive into one of France's most wonderful museums, the Orsay Museum in Paris. I have to admit, I really like that museum because I find the art there approachable, but it's not all, there's some issues with it. So we'll talk about it. It's not too big, not too small. I don't know. I just I think it's a must-see in Paris. I think it gets a lot of visitors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as always, don't worry if you can't take notes and you'd like to. You can find our show notes on joinusinfrance.com/15. So, I want to update you on how the show is going. I have done a few things to get the word out about this podcast on social networks. The show has a Facebook page with, quite a few followers and quite a few likes. We could always use more, obviously.
Always.
And we would love to have more people participate, talk to us, tell us what you think, make comments. We really enjoy whenever people say stuff to us on the Facebook page. There are two people who are very good about looking at our Facebook page, and these are Nancy Valdez and Joseph Avioli.
He's one of my clients from Paris.
Oh, there you go. And
here's Joe again. Thanks, Joe.
Yes, he's great. He always sees the page and likes everything, and he's wonderful. So we would love more interaction. To find us, it's very easy. It's facebook.com, and then you search for Join Us in France. And then I had a harebrained idea.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. You see, young people, they're all on YouTube, right? And YouTube is a huge, people under 40, I think they spend half of their internet time on YouTube. So I thought, well, we should be there too. And I thought, I love to take pictures. So I had all these pictures of Notre Dame.
Notre Dame.
Yes, I can't stand saying Notre Dame. That sounds so wrong. So Notre Dame, okay? For me, it's Notre Dame. And I had all these pictures, and I thought, maybe I could use these pictures, make kind of a slideshow, and put one of the episodes on top. And so that's what I did, and I put it on.
Isn't that a great idea?
Yes, and it's nice because you can listen to the episode while looking at pictures of Notre Dame. Now, obviously, I'm not showing you pictures of what Elise is talking about because I don't necessarily have all the pictures of what Elise talks about.
But you get a good idea.
Yeah, but you get a good idea. You see all these things. It helps you visualize. And so that's on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube, you will find our Join Us in France. Let me see. What is it called? It's called Join Us in France Travel Podcast. That's the name of the YouTube channel. And we only have 3 followers. It's very sad.
Oh, they'll come.
They'll come. So please come to YouTube and subscribe to our channel. I will not put every episode on there because I don't have enough pictures for every episode, but I'll probably do the Eiffel Tower because I have a lot of pictures.
Oh, yes.
Off the Eiffel Tower and from the Eiffel Tower. So I'll probably do that one too. That's all the promotion I have for today, Elise.
You're always good for the promotion, Annie.
Well, somebody has to do it, we love to see the show grow, and it has been growing, so it's really wonderful. So now a little music to get us in the mood, and we'll get right into it.
Great. Hi, Annie.
Hi, Elise. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good.
So today we're going to talk about the museum that Americans love to see in Paris. And that is the Orsay Museum.
Yes.
This is, quite honestly, it probably has a little bit less of a number of visitors than the Louvre because the visitors go to the Louvre really from every country in the world. But as far as Americans are concerned, this is the one museum in Paris to not miss. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this is very interesting because this is a very it's not that other people don't go to visit it. It's a very popular museum.
Yeah.
And of course, when we talk at the end about the practical info, we'll talk a little bit about that. But it happens to be a particularly important museum for American tourists, and secondly, for Japanese tourists, but even more so for American tourists, for the simple reason that this is the museum in Paris that has Impressionist art.
Uh-huh.
And as far as most Americans are concerned, their idea of painting and in painting in France and painting in relation to the French artists really is associated with the Impressionists and the people that are, for people who are not in the business of being an art historian, they kind of glop all together Impressionists and Post-Impressionists, but I'll explain a little bit what the difference is.
Okay, but glop together.
You glop together. You're a glopper. What can I tell you? But anyway, it is the reason why it is such an important and very, very popular museum. So I thought we should take a tour of the Orsay Museum.
That sounds great.
What we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the building, just a little bit, and then talk a lot about the collection of fabulous, fabulous, fabulous painting and sculpture and some photography that is what has made this museum so famous all over the world. Okay, so the Orsay Museum. The Orsay Museum is a fabulous looking building that is along the Seine River, really just almost directly opposite from the Louvre, interestingly enough. It's a museum you can walk to from the other side of the river. All you have to do is go across the bridge that goes right through the Tuileries Gardens, which are the gardens that are across the way. Or you can get there if you're on the left side of the river from various buses that go by there and the metro too. So it's a museum that is relatively easy to access.
Yeah.
And I just want to say a few things about the building itself because it is rather impressive. Orsay used to be a train station.
Right.
Now, the actual history of the building is quite fascinating. It was begun not as a train station. This is what everybody knows. Everybody pretty much knows that the building was a train station before. But it turns out that even before it was a train station, it was a palace built for the administration.
Oh.
It was actually a government building.
Did not know that.
No, very few people know. Very, very few people know that. It actually was built starting in 1810. So it was built quite a long time ago. And that first building was a very, very elaborate example of fancy administration. Very beautiful building made with stone, limestone, of course, that all the big buildings in Paris are made out of, with lots of sculpture on the outside and with some very elaborate gold-gilded decoration on the walls, on the rooms on the inside, molding and all of that stuff. And it was an administration building, believe it or not, through most of the 1800s.
Oh, wow.
And then what happened was, at the very end of the 1890s, there was a terrible, terrible fire that destroyed a good part of the building. And so what happened was, it's interestingly enough, I can imagine, remember, this is the same time period as the Eiffel Tower and all of these things. And so they decided that they were going to rebuild the structure there. And so what they did was they used the same ideas as they had used basically for the building of the Eiffel Tower, and they gave a couple of architects the job of creating the structure. And so the actual structure that is invisible of the building is, in fact, made of cast iron and glass.
Yeah, you do see a lot of cast iron and glass.
You see the windows, but you don't really see the structure because it got covered over relatively quickly. So this is what they did, because in the memory of Parisians, the building was an administrative building that was from the early 1800s. they made this very modern structure. And if you go online, you can see a few pictures of when it was being built. It was this fabulous thing that looks a little bit like the Grand Palais, all glass and cast iron and everything. And then they decided that they were going to cover it over on the outside and on the inside with neoclassical, traditional style stucco, plaster, and stone. So they hid what was, in fact, the modern structure of the building. And so it got covered on the outside with this very elaborate stone and a little bit of plaster with these sculptures, very, very ornate. And they did the same thing on the inside with what are called caissons. So the inside, which is this very enormous tunnel-curved high ceiling, is covered with plaster squares that are actually sculpted into the ceiling. So they work acoustically, but in fact they are covering up what was the original intention of the architecture of the building.
But it looks good. I mean, it's a pleasant-looking building.
It's a very pleasant-looking building.
Yeah.
So when it was finished, in fact, it was inaugurated in 1898 as a train station. And it was inaugurated, believe it or not, now we know Paris has quite a few train stations. This was to be one of the very first train stations for electric trains.
Aha.
And it was the Paris-Orléans line.
Okay.
Which, of course, means going south and slightly southwest.
Yes.
And it stayed a train station for a number of years. And it only stopped being a train station in 1939, believe it or not, which is, of course, the beginning of World War II.
Yes.
But it didn't stop being a train station because of the war. It stopped because by this point, the tracks were not long enough for the trains, and the technological aspects of the train systems had changed, and they could not incorporate them into the trains arriving into this train station anymore.
Oh, okay. So there was some incompatibility.
There was incompatibility. It was exactly what it was, you know. So what happened was that they literally stopped using it as a train station.
Okay.
So we have the World War II period, of course, which is the occupation of Paris. And then in 1945, and for several years after that, the building itself was actually used as a receiving center for returning survivors, prisoners of war, and people who were survivors of the camps.
Oh, wow.
So it was never destroyed, of course. It was considered to be a very beautiful building. And once that function was over, once it stopped being used for that purpose, there was a question of what to do with it. So we're talking about the period basically between 1950 and 1970. Some people wanted to raise the building to add other things, to change the skyline of the section along the Seine River. And of course, as usual, there were a group of people who considered that it was a very beautiful building.
And it is.
And they wanted to keep it. But what do you do with a building that was designed to be a train station? It's cavernous on the inside.
Yes, it's very large and very tall.
It's very tall. It's this enormous tunnel-shaped building.
Yeah.
It was not designed in any way with natural light. So what do you do to make this into something, for instance, that could be a museum?
Yeah.
Well, it took a long time for some architects and some city administrators to work it out. And finally, in the early 1970s, they came up with an idea. The Louvre Museum, which of course is the largest art museum in the world, was the home to a lot of the 19th century art collection that, of course, was very, very important for the history of art in relation to not just France, but in relation to all over Europe.
Right.
19th century is the time period when painting and sculpture flourished in France. Most of the French painters and artists we know are artists from the 19th century and the very, very, very beginning of the 20th century. And most of this work was either in storage someplace or was shown in a teeny little bit of a room. But in the Louvre... Storage, yes, storage. Well, first of all, I don't know if you realize it, but, you know, a museum is like an iceberg. The amount of work you see is usually 1/4 to 1/5 of the work that a museum owns.
Really?
Always.
Huh.
Always. So what happens is you have in permanent collections a usual rotation of work. Now, when you have big pieces of sculpture, that makes it a little bit more complicated. But basically, when it comes to painting, photography, small objects, small sculpture, you have to imagine that for every one you see, there are at least 3 or 4 in storage somewhere.
Oh, wow.
So this is what happened. The 19th century is the century for French art.
Yeah.
There was no specific museum that was devoted exclusively to that time period in Paris. There was a museum of 20th century art. That is the Centre Pompidou.
Yeah.
There was a small museum at the Orangerie. And there was the Louvre, which basically has everything from the beginning of time right up through the end of the 19th century.
Everything.
But the 19th century was not the real concentration of the important work in the Louvre. So it was decided to take this train station and convert it physically into a museum that would be the Museum of 19th Century Art.
Okay.
Of 19th century French art at first, exclusively French. Basically, everything in the museum is work that was created between 1848 and 1914.
Okay.
Everything stops with World War One. And that's another whole thing. But that's part of art history. That's another thing I can talk about another time. So it took a number of years to work on the building to turn it into a museum. And when the building was opened as a museum, it was, in fact, inaugurated in 1986.
Okay.
So that's not very, very long ago.
No.
Right? It's 28 years ago. And it was an immediate success. I was actually living in Paris at the time. And
this is when I left France, by the way.
This is when you left France,
yeah,
right? This is
1987.
We crossed in the air, Annie.
Yes, we did. We did.
Probably could have waved to each other from our airplanes. You know? And I remember what a big deal the opening was of Orsay Museum. And literally, I'm not exaggerating, from the first day, it was full. It was a crowd waiting for the doors to open to get inside.
Wow.
And it has never, ever, ever changed. It's
a very popular museum.
It's a very, very popular museum. Now, I know we've had another podcast talking about Versailles.
Yes.
Versailles is a humongous place that is packed to the brim inside the chateau. When you go there, if you go out in the park, you don't feel it. You don't feel the fact that there are that many thousands of people there, but of course inside the chateau you do. Orsay on a smaller scale is pretty much the same thing, except that there's no park on the outside. There's the Seine River. You can walk
outside
along
you're
the
in the
banks
city.
along the Seine River. But this is what happens. Orsay is open, as all the museums are, 6 days a week. It's open late one night, which happens to be Thursday night.
Okay. By late, you mean?
It's open till 8:45.
Oh, well, that's not very late. But
well,
okay.
That's except for the weekend when they have the museums open all night long, like in a Ben Stiller movie, where everything comes to life
museum.
in the middle of it. It'd just be wonderful to have some of the statues coming around and tapping you on the shoulder, but they don't.
Yeah.
But otherwise, of course, typical closing time is 6:00. And 6:00 means you start getting shooed out at 6:15.
Yeah.
They start announcing that the museum is closing.
Yeah,
and
French
you have
people like
leave.
to go home at the end of the day, and they won't
people
keep it open
do.
for you. Yeah. Well, but in America, they're much more. Not in museums.
No, museums.
She's
no.
waving no at me.
No, you're wrong. I mean, museums basically. In fact, a lot of museums have even shorter hours because Orsay is open from 9:30 in the morning on. So it's open from 9:30, of course, right through to 5:45. Thursday nights open till 8:45. Mm-hmm. That's basically the hours that you'll get. But the thing about Orsay is that it opens at 9:30. If you are not there on a day when it's minus 25,000 outside and the winds are coming off the Seine River, you might as well show up at 9:00 in the morning, because at 9:30 there is already a crowd outside waiting to get in.
Yeah.
So
It's a popular place.
It is an extremely, extremely popular museum. And
although I was there, last time I was there was just a couple of years ago, and it was, I think it was February or maybe early March. And it was manageable. I mean, there were people, but it was manageable.
well, of course, if you were there in February, unless it was the period of school vacation, winter break,
It was.
You will have somewhat less congestion. Okay.
Yeah.
Obviously, the summer months in any of these places that are very popular are just unbearable in terms of getting in. However, the same advice applies here, and even more so. It's even on the website. It says this, which is very interesting. It says very, very clearly, this is a museum that is very popular. The crowds show up immediately at opening time. In order to avoid standing online for 1 hour, to buy your ticket, buy it in advance. Buy your ticket online. And if you buy your ticket, make sure you buy the ticket that you can print out, because once you have the ticket to the Orsay Museum, you can actually use the ticket to go to the Rodin Museum as well.
Oh, and that is one you should
And that's a wonderful
go
little
to.
museum.
That is my favorite museum
we'll,
in Paris.
We'll really talk about, because some of the smaller museums, I like talking about these big ones because these are the ones people have heard of. These are the ones people want to go to.
Right, and we have to talk
but
about
there are some
them.
small ones that are absolute gems. And, of
Yeah.
course, the Rodin Museum is one of
Yeah.
them. But what's really interesting is that it really is encouraged, even by the people who run the museum, for you to buy the ticket ahead of time. There are two different doorways into the museum. If you have your ticket ahead of time, you go to the door that's on the right of the big esplanade. You may have a 5-minute wait to get in.
Right, but it's
and
nothing
then you
too
go
bad.
through the security check, which now is obligatory in all of these
Everywhere,
museums.
yeah.
And then you go into the museum, because otherwise you can really spend an hour outside. Now, the problem is this too, is that the Orsay Museum is famous for its permanent collection, and we'll talk about what's in the museum in a minute. But it's also famous for very, very, very good temporary exhibits. And so what happens
I
is,
saw a really good one.
when you have a very good exhibit there, that's a special exhibit, it doubles the crowd that is waiting online to get inside, which means that it's really one of those places where it's just not worth it. I wouldn't want to, if I had a few days in Paris, even if I had a week in Paris, I would not want to lose an hour and a half standing online to get a ticket.
Of course, if you can do it some other way, do it some other way.
And it doesn't cost any difference.
Right,
I mean,
right.
it's the same price.
Yeah.
It's the same exact price.
Is it part of the museum pass for Paris?
It's part of the museum pass, which is wonderful because, of course, with the museum pass, aside from the fact that you might have to have a teeny little wait, you can actually go in, you can go out, you can go back in a little bit later if you want to. The advantages of the pass are that you really have an open sesame, and you can go in and out as much as you want to,
Yeah,
which is very good.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this museum and why it is so incredibly popular and incredibly famous. As I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, the 19th century was the century for French artists. If we talk about the Renaissance, we usually think of Italy.
Yeah.
If we talk about most of the painting and even a lot of the sculpture that was done from the early 1800s till the beginning of World War I, even though there are famous artists in some other countries that we mostly have heard of, the majority of the art that we know about as general culture is French. This was their glorious artistic century, which is kind of ironic because it certainly wasn't from a political point of view, but it was actually the richest, incredible time period for painting. And one of the reasons, very simply, is that, and this is what you see, one of the things you do see if you take the time and have the patience to not just go to see the Impressionist artwork in the museum, but to see everything in the museum. And this is something that I feel very strongly about. France basically was a country that had spent over 100 years doing very, very conservative academic painting. In fact, it's called the Academy, right? This is where we get the sense of academic painting, because in France, starting with our famous, wonderful Louis XIV, you have what are called the academies. And these are basically different societies, one for writing, one for painting, one for architecture, one for mathematics, and all of these different subjects. And this group of people, largely men until very recent times, obviously, they decided what was in and what was out, what you could do and what you couldn't do.
Yes.
The style you should have and the style that was not acceptable.
Yeah.
And so our idea of what is academic really comes from this thing, that was called these academies. And so for a long time, that's what French painting was like. Now, some of it is okay. It happens that it's not my particular cup of tea, most of it. But there's some really interesting things that you can see. And then what happened was that at the beginning of the 19th century, there was some movement. And of course, the French Revolution and Napoleon and a lot of people, ironically, leaving, going to England, going to other European countries, or even to the United States, and coming back not only with new ideas about politics, but there was more of an exchange happening. And there was this kind of movement happening of let's liberate ourselves from this old, stuffy kind of way of painting. And so what you see if you go through the entire collection in the museum at Orsay, because everything is arranged in chronological order.
Which is,
is very unusual.
Yeah.
It's very, very unusual, right? So what you have is you can actually follow the development of painting. It's a little bit easier than the sculpture. We'll talk about the situation physically in the museum in a minute. But if you start in the museum down below on the ground floor, on one side, which is basically when you walk into the museum, when you get past where you get your security check, where you show your ticket, you arrive on a kind of mezzanine esplanade, and you have this staircase that takes you down to what is really the ground floor, and you have this majestic, absolutely superb view of the entire structure. And to your left, on the ground floor, and then on the medium floor, which is not really the second floor, but they call it that. And then the top floor, which is the top floor, even though they call it the fifth floor, you have the history of
French
painting.
logic, don't try.
Right, don't even figure it out.
Yeah.
You have all of the painting starting with the very beginning of the 1800s, work your way back and forth in a kind of zigzag, and you get up to the top.
So you
actually
from the bottom.
Yeah. If you have the time. Okay, this is the thing about the Orsay. Some people come and all they want to see is the Monet, Cezanne, Renoir. I mean, basically, they want to see the Impressionists.
Yeah.
They know that these are where the Impressionists are. They walk in, they go up to the top floor, they look at them for an hour, and they leave. Now, obviously, if that's what you want to do...
And they're on the left or the right?
They're all the way up on the top floor, on the left, standing, facing the building once you get inside.
Yes.
So it's on the north side, the side that's actually closest to the Seine River.
Okay.
But there are people who do that. And then there are a lot of people, and I will confess that occasionally, since I go there quite often, occasionally that is what I do, especially if I'm going accompanying people, so I want to talk about some of the painting. I will take them up to the Impressionist paintings first.
Yeah.
And then I will say, there are other things to see. Let's go down below and let's take a look at some of these other things.
Yeah.
But in fact, the concept of this museum is to show the evolution of the art in France from the beginning of the 18th century to the beginning of from the beginning of the 1800s to the beginning of the 1900s.
Okay.
So if you do the museum the way the people have thought of it, you start at the bottom, you work your way through various kinds of styles, and you work your way up to the medium level, and then you work your way up to the top level on the north side.
Yep.
And then you come back down around, and you go back down to the medium level, and on the other side, in this case now being, of course, the south side, you will have what is called the period of Post-Impressionism, and I'll talk a little bit about who those people are. And then when you go back down to the bottom, you have photography, and you have in the center of this massive structure, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sculpture,
And
pieces
some
of sculpture.
of them are amazing.
And the only other part of this museum, which I happen to love a lot, which is a little bit ignored, but I don't think should be, there's a whole section on the medium level, that's on the side that is on the painting side, that is Art Deco and Art Nouveau, because they have a whole section of decorative arts, of furniture, of ceramics, magnificent pieces, original pieces that are both from the Art Nouveau and Art Deco period, which were the two really important design periods for that time frame.
Right. And if they have a temporary exhibit, it's going to be on the very top, right? No,
because they've just rearranged everything. See, in the last 2 years, they have changed a lot of the thing. And in fact, thankfully, for seeing the Impressionist artwork, they have really done what they should have done from the beginning, because originally it was set in these tiny little rooms. There was no perspective. You couldn't pull back far to take a look at anything. And now what they have done is they have taken the entire top floor on the northern side in these large, large rooms, mostly with some natural light, not all of them, but mostly with some natural light. And they have made a succession of rooms for all of the Impressionist painting. So all temporary exhibits are on the medium level,
okay,
not on the ground level, which means you don't go down the steps. When you walk in the door after giving your ticket, you turn to the left, and there's a little desk there where you can get an audio guide if you want, and all the temporary exhibits are on that level right now. And it's a fairly decent sized space. The exhibit that I just saw the last few months ago was an exhibit on a male nudity in painting. The one before that was on the relationship between fashion and the paintings of the Impressionist painters, and they had a collection of the paintings and the beautiful dresses that the women wore, and they showed how they were inspired. Actually, some of the paintings were inspired by the dresses, and some of the dresses actually were inspired by the paintings. So I liked that exhibit quite a lot.
Yeah, and when I was there a couple of years ago, it was an exhibit on Mahler, I think, the musician.
That's right.
The composer. And it was really fun because you entered the room and they were playing one of the symphonies, and you could walk around the room and see the original manuscript of the score for that piece. And I was there with my in-laws, and they're both professional musicians. And I was just looking around at everything. I'm not very well educated in music. And all of a sudden I realized that my mother-in-law had found on the wall, on the score, the stuff that was playing. And she was following along for quite a long time. And I thought, oh my goodness, these people are just out of this world.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing that's happened in the evolution of the museum is that originally it was supposed to be only exclusively for French artists. And now, of course, that has opened up. So, of course, first because you have your temporary exhibits, one of the ones I just saw recently was almost exclusively German art. It was German art of the 19th century. But also because with certain kinds of artwork, particularly in photography, they had to include American artists because American photography is extremely important starting at the end of the 19th century. And then they do have Germans who are 19th century romantics, the Goethe, and there was even an exhit.
Yeah, it's pretty varied. It's kind of, I think it's nice that they have a little bit of everything.
It really does touch on everything. Basically, it's a really what we could say is a European or Western art 19th century art museum. And it does very much stop in 1914 for this simple reason that art immediately changed with World War I. And that's, as they would say, that's another story to tell.
Yes.
So just to give people an idea, I know that most people have heard of the Orsay Museum, and they do want to go there. And it is the largest collection of Impressionist and Post-Impressionist painting and art in the world, without question. Just some numbers for some specific painters and artists. Remember, these numbers don't indicate all that you would see at any given time. This is the numbers for how many of these works by these artists the museum owns. So, without any specific chronological order, because it's a bit complicated, and most people who are not in the business don't really know what the order is in chronology of some of these artists anyway. But just to get an idea, Manet, who is a painter that I have come to appreciate more and more and more. I used to like him. Now I love him. Okay. Manet has 39 paintings and 12 pastel drawings in the collection of the museum. Renoir, who of course is a name that I think anyone who knows anything about painting in the last couple of 100 years has heard of, even if they don't know how to recognize one of his paintings. There are 62 of his paintings.
Yeah.
Now, he was very prolific. That doesn't mean other people have not got a Renoir. He produced a lot of artwork.
Yeah.
But still, 62 is a huge number for any one artist. Toulouse-Lautrec, who was from down where we live in the southwest of France, and where there is a museum that has a large collection of his work, has 18. Van Gogh.
Yeah, there's a ton of them.
Van Gogh, there are surprisingly fewer than you might imagine. There are 23. And most of them, unlike a lot of the other artists, are in fact on display, at least 50% at any given time. And
you see some amazing Van Gogh there.
they have his self-portraits. They have Starry Nights.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why, well, there are two reasons why there are only, if you want to call it 23. One is because, of course, he didn't live very long, and his work, he didn't produce that much work, although I must say, for someone who died at the age of 37, he was extraordinarily prolific.
Yeah.
However, there are other reasons. One is that in Amsterdam, there is, of course, a huge Van Gogh museum.
Of course.
Which has a huge collection of his work. And also, his work is owned by many, many, many Americans and American museums.
Yeah.
He is a real favorite for Americans. There's also Gauguin, his sort of friend, his friend and then his ex-friend. There are 23 of his paintings and 3 pastels.
And I enjoy those very much myself.
And probably the two people that people go to see the most, even though they're not the same in terms of their style, we have Monet. There are 72.
Oh, my goodness.
72 paintings by Monet. Now,
That's a lot.
it's a lot.
I didn't realize that, see?
But believe it or not, as many paintings as they have by Monet at the Orsay, there are more at the Marmottan, which is a small museum in the 16th arrondissement, and there are more in the United States. He was, of course, an extraordinary
Really
prolific, and he lived till he was 84, and he painted till the day he died. So his painting, of course, is magnificent. And personally, if you go to see any one painter at this museum, it has to be Monet. That's my attitude about it.
Yeah.
But there's also one of my other favorite painters, someone who's a little bit more divisive in terms of the public opinion about him, but I also think is wonderful, and that is Paul Cezanne.
Oh, yes. Love
And
him.
Cezanne, there are 46 of his paintings in the museum. So this is just to give you an idea. I can
But they're
name...
not all on display at once.
No. They're
right.
But let's say that when you go upstairs to the part that covers the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist, because Van Gogh is not Impressionist, he's Post-Impressionist, but it doesn't matter. All of these, you will see the Monet, there's a good 20 on exhibit, if you count all of the different things.
Yeah.
You have other people too. You have Whistler. Believe it or not, Whistler, I don't know how many people have probably heard, if they've never seen Whistler's Mother. They think of that painting. The actual name of the painting is Study in Gray and Black, #1.
Okay. Didn't know that.
And he used his mother simply as an excuse for making a painting that was a study in white, gray, and black. There is only that painting, but it's a major painting.
Yes.
But Whistler is someone who was an expat. He was born in the States, but went and lived his artistic life in England. And he was very good friends with Monet. And Monet used to go and spend time in London and visit with Whistler and with an English artist named Turner. And just like artists do, the three of them would go find a place along the Thames, and the three of them would set up their easels, and they would all paint the same thing. And then they would look at each other's work and go, wow, you did that. Wow, you did that. And of course, each of them has a very distinctive style.
Yeah.
So it's fabulous. There is so much painting, but there are other painters. There are painters that most Americans have not heard of. One of them, when I go and take people through that they ask me about, is a man named Sisley.
Okay.
Who was a French painter, who was an Impressionist painter, and there's quite a nice collection of his work in the museum. His work is absolutely lovely, and people afterwards say, how come I never heard of him? Well, of course, let's put it this way. You have your A list, you have your B list. This museum has them all.
Yeah.
It just has them all. And in fact, in French art history and in French artistic circles, Sisley is well known. He's less known in the United States. Pissarro is somebody else who is relatively well known here and not so well known in the United States. But it is fabulous. It is absolutely fabulous. To see the Van Gogh, the Gauguin, and the Seurat, you have to go down to the second level on the other side because those are considered to be after the period of the Impressionists. But it gives you a wonderful, wonderful idea of the development of the different ideas of how to do painting.
So just to recap, you would start, when you enter the museum, you would start from the bottom on your left-hand side.
Okay, let's say this. If you only have a couple of hours and you don't have more than that, obviously the thing to do is go straight up to the Impressionists and then go to see the Post-Impressionists, which would be the Van Gogh, the Gauguin, those people. Because I think that is really what people do come to see at the museum. That's the outstanding stuff. That's the stuff that is the most outstanding.
It's all outstanding.
It's the most well-known.
Yes.
It's what people come to see.
Yes.
If you love that and you have more time, you can simply take the time to go back downstairs because, quite honestly, it doesn't matter. You can go and look at the other painting afterwards. The other painting is a little bit more classical in style. It's very figurative. Now, we're in a museum that has no abstract painting. This is all figurative painting. But you have different schools of painting. So you have a school called Orientalism, which I happen to like a lot because it's very colorful, it's very sensual, very beautiful. You have paintings that were inspired by travels to North Africa, to Morocco, and Algeria. You have these very, very sexy ladies lying around, in these very interesting positions. It's very beautiful painting. You have various other styles of painting that lead up to Impressionist painting, and you will discover that there are some very beautiful works in the midst of all of this. You also have the decorative arts. If you're interested in furniture and things like that, it's a lovely, small, but lovely, lovely collection.
Yep.
And then you have, without talking about the center, which I'll talk about in the middle in a minute, but you also have the photography, which was the last part added on to the collection. Strangely enough, in France, where photography was invented in the 1830s, until 1975, there was no special photography department in a museum. In the United States, in the Museum of Modern Art, it was one of the first sections to be established because it was established by Edward Steichen, who were both people who were functioning as professional photographers at the very beginning of the 20th century.
Yeah.
But in the United States, photography was taken far more seriously right away in an artistic way.
Here it's more of a...
It took a long time.
Yeah.
So the collection is very interesting, and it does now include some of the earliest photography, which is beautiful to see. You have these very old daguerreotype prints and all of these things in black and white.
I don't even remember seeing any of it. I wonder if we skipped it completely.
You probably did.
Yeah.
See, but I think the problem with a museum like this, just like any museum that is of a certain size, is that you have to have an idea of how much time you can give it and what your priorities are. So when you go to a very small museum, it's not a problem. You go in, you go out. But anytime you have several different collections inside a museum and you have lots of things to see, you have to make up your mind. I have gone to this museum with some people. After 2 hours, they're done. They've had enough. They're out. I've taken people to this museum who tell me, you know what? I think I want to spend the rest of the day here. And after we've gone through a certain part, and, and you let everybody do their own thing, they'll say to me, I'll meet up with you back maybe 5:00 tonight. I just need to spend the rest of the day here.
Yeah.
So it depends on your affinity.
Yeah.
It depends on what it is you like. The center part of the museum, this cavernous open center, is where all the sculpture is.
And I thought that was outstanding.
Now, you happen to love
sculpture, yeah.
And, of course, there's a lot of 19th century sculpture in France is very figurative. It's mostly made out of stone, although there is some bronze sculpture. And you have, of course, the most famous sculptor, who is Rodin.
Yeah.
However, Rodin has a couple of pieces in this museum, but since he has his own museum, not very far away, in fact, most of the works are not here. There are just a few here. And, of course, Rodin's work is a bit scattered all over Paris and all over the world, because most of it is made out of bronze. And so he made 3 or 4 of everything that he did.
Yeah.
Whereas what you have mostly in this museum is very beautiful and sometimes very strange and symbolic sculptures. Small ones, medium size, and very big. You have a lot of female figures. You have a lot of portraits. You have very beautiful work. And you were mentioning that one of the ones that you absolutely love is a bichrome, which means 2 different color marble sculpture.
It's just amazing. That's one thing. That's one that I will never forget. It's called Negro from the Sudan, and it's by Charles Cordier, which I had never heard of this.
No.
But it's this magnificent looking black person
with a turban
and a beautiful robe, and it's the upper body.
It's a bust.
Yes.
Right.
And there's different colors of marble. It's just unbelievably beautiful.
It's very beautiful.
I could have stared at that for an hour alone.
The sculpture is interesting because it's all placed in this very, very big, uniformly open space. So you can look at it from close up and you can look at it from very far away, which is very nice. And in the remanagement, in the rearranging of that he did starting in 2002, because they have done a lot of rearranging inside the museum, they have made a space on the median floor, basically the second floor on the southern side, on the side opposite from where the Impressionist painting is, where they have put a lot of smaller sculptures. And so you have a few pieces by Gogh, who, by the way, was not just a painter.
Obviously.
He did many, many sculptures, and his sculptures are very small because they're mostly of dancers and women. And you have some sculptures by Camille Claudel, who, of course, is famous for having been associated with Rodin, and who unfortunately had a very tragic life. But there are several of her works there, and one she even did as an old lady in the psychiatric ward where she spent a good part of her life. It's very, very touching. It's one of the pieces that I actually like in the collection. But you have enormous amounts of sculpture. You have to be careful. There's a great, great, great temptation to touch. Sculpture is meant for touching the smoothness of the marble, the bumps in the bronze. No, touching, no touching.
Also at the Orsay Museum, there is no photography, and they will really get on your case. It's a little bit annoying, I must admit. That's the one thing I don't like about the Orsay Museum, is that everybody has a cell phone these days.
Yeah.
And all these smartphones are cameras.
Right.
And everybody is trying to take pictures when they're not supposed to. And
they're trying to sneak them in.
Yes, and the guards catch them and yell at them, and it's just unpleasant. I think it would be a much better experience for everybody if they just let the cameras be. I mean,
you can't, Annie.
At the Louvre, they manage.
Yes, it's true with the Louvre. I think the Louvre has to do with the fact that they don't know how to manage 25,000 people a day, literally. And of course, they do have it without flash in the Louvre.
Right.
But here, I think part of the problem is, and this is part of the downside of the Orsay Museum, it's a museum that is incredibly fabulous for its collection. However, it's not an easy museum in some ways. Number one, the way you go upstairs and downstairs, you have on both extreme ends, the extremities of the building, you have two very small elevators for handicapped that you have to go and find. They're not easy to see where they are.
But it's doable because I was accompanying a person in a wheelchair and it was fine. We managed to go everywhere. But yes, you do have to go find it. And
you have to find it. It's not very easy. You have access by stairs only up to the in-between floor, the median floor.
Yeah.
From there's an escalator that zigs and zags up to the top floor. If you want to get down, you have either stairs only at the back end, or you go back to where you started at the beginning and you go down the escalator 2 flights, and then you have to take the last flight down. I find that very, very unuser-friendly.
Yeah, it's not very user-friendly.
The other thing is, and it's the same on the other side. The other thing is that access to toilets. You have a couple of toilets that are close to the cafe, which is right on the floor and right before you go into the Impressionist painting section,
and a little bit
next
hard
to the cafe.
Find.
And then the only other ones, and they've just changed it to make them even available, is when you enter into the museum, you go down the stairs to the ground floor and then down some more stairs, and both to the left and to the right are a series of toilets. I've gone in a couple of times when they've been school groups who've come in, and they just basically take up one side and you sort of have to wait. Or if you're lucky enough to find a friendly guide, and I'm saying that, I'm not being sarcastic. I'm saying that because this is my experience, that I really don't find that Orsay is that user-friendly. And so if you find a guide who wants to be helpful, they will tell you that if you go to the other side, there may be more availability. But they don't always do that, and they just sort of stand there and make sure you don't touch things.
Yeah, I remember I had a bit of a problem because they wanted me to check my camera into their back room there, and I have expensive camera equipment, and I was not a happy camper at all.
They wouldn't let you carry it around.
No, they didn't want me to carry. It's a small backpack with camera equipment, and I just had to pretty much threaten the woman with her life that if anything was missing, I would have to strangle her.
Right.
And but it was fine. Nothing went missing. I was just overly worried. I had just bought this.
That's very interesting because usually when you, my experience is now at least that you don't have to check if it's a small backpack. Okay, but they will tell you that if you do check things, you should never leave your camera in the bag. So I'm surprised that you had that problem.
When it's a bag full of camera equipment, it's all camera equipment. You can't carry that. If you have several zoom lenses and whatever, several camera bodies, you can't carry it all.
Yeah.
I should have known to leave that in the hotel.
Except that I've gone with, of course, they didn't have a whole bag full of camera equipment, but I've gone with people who have little cameras, and of course the only thing is you just can't take pictures, and that's the way it is.
A little camera or a cell phone or whatever, it's not a problem. It's just if you have a lot of expensive camera equipment. I just had a bad experience with that, but it's probably not a problem for 99% of travelers.
Probably not.
Yeah.
But I would say that just basically, this is to me the downside of Orsay is that it's not the most user-friendly. It's not. It's a little awkward in terms of the circulation of going up and down because you have it just at the two extremities of the building, and there is limited handicap access. It's not a lot. I'm thinking of other museums that are even older that have managed to renovate the insides, and one of them being the Louvre.
You do have to get around. They'll tell you, you have to get around. Some places have 3 or 4 stairs,
right?
And you have to go around the whole long way to get down those 3 or 4 stairs.
Right.
And some things we never got back to because I couldn't find my way around back to where the stairs were. Things like that. But we managed to visit it and see most of the things we were interested in, so it was fine. I wouldn't say if you're needing a wheelchair, don't skip it just because of that.
No,
but realize that it's going to be a little slow going.
A little advice, which is to let there is an agency or an office, if you want. You can let them know that you're having a visit with someone who's in a wheelchair. And it makes it a little bit easier if they are warned in advance, because then they will have somebody who will help indicate where you get the elevator and things like that. So it does help to do that in advance. The other thing, of course, about the Orsay is this fabulous clock. Now, there are two of them. And it was used in Martin Scorsese in his movie Hugo Pratt, the movie about the history of cinema. He actually filmed a scene inside one of the rooms, and one of the two fabulously huge, gorgeous clocks is where this cafe is, which is at one end of the entire wing where the Impressionist painting is, and it's very lovely. It used to be easy to get a seat there, and it wasn't too expensive. And it used to be, until a year and a half ago, that the balcony was open, and there was a little bit of a stand there where you could get a coffee or an ice cream, and you have this fabulous view of the Louvre, of the Seine River, and of everything on the other side. And when they renovated the section with the Impressionist painting, they closed it all off. So you no longer have access to the balcony on the outside. You can look through these enormous glass doors and take pictures out that of the landscape, of the view of Paris. But they do not want to have any access to the outside. And one of the reasons, interestingly enough, is because they don't want anybody trying to take a painting and run around and jump off the balcony with the painting. It has nothing to do with people's safety, believe me, because in the past there were people sitting on the balustrade of the balcony, and nobody could have cared less. But it has to do with the value of the work that's inside there.
Oh yeah, there's a couple dollars in there. Yes,
there's a couple of dollars in there, just a couple.
Yeah.
So you have these two fabulous clocks that are really mythic. And of course, even when you walk along the banks of the Seine River or take the Bateau or take a bus, you see them. And of course, they are one of the identifiers that tells you that it is the Orsay Museum. So obviously, it's a museum that's really worth seeing. I would say that it's a museum that needs between 2 hours and a half a day.
Yeah.
According to your energy level, how much time you have in Paris. But give other things a chance besides the Impressionist painting. That's the way I feel like. Give this a chance, This is a museum that is so rich in the history of 19th century art.
Although, okay, I'm going to contradict you just a little bit. Seeing Starry Night up close. You can get right up close, right?
You can get up to a foot away.
Yeah, right. But, that's up close.
That's up close.
Unlike Mona Lisa or something that's behind thick glass and you can't see nothing and it's tiny. It's like a waste of time. But you go see these Impressionist paintings and you can look at it from up close and you can see the bumps of paint and it's beautiful. It's not the same at all. You have seen all these pieces of art in print or on the internet all your life. It's not the same. Seeing it in person is not the same.
But that's you're not contradicting me. What I'm saying is that obviously this is one of the reasons why people go there, but that it's worth taking the time to see some of the other things too.
Oh, yeah. I spent plenty of time there.
Unless you really are in a rush, which of course can happen.
Yeah.
I have been there so much, but every time I go, there will be some painting that I've probably seen before, some artists whose work I really like, or maybe a new artist that I suddenly say, oh, gee, that really is beautiful, or wow, look at the color in that, or look at the way they used light in that painting. Mm-hmm. So there's always something new to discover.
Yeah.
There's always something rich to see. The paintings are absolutely beautiful, and in fact, in the subject matter, they're more varied than most people imagine. But what I'm just saying is that unless you only have a very limited amount of time,
don't just go to the Impressionist and stop.
Don't just go there and stop. Try and take at least the time to go through some of the other areas, because it's a very special museum in that way. Now, just one last thing. I talked a little bit about what I consider to be its little difficulties in terms of circulation and finding toilets and things like that. It's a museum that's in a very posh part of Paris. It's the 7th arrondissement. Mm-hmm. You have a lot of government buildings nearby. In the museum itself, you have this cafe which has raised its prices now that they've renovated, obviously. So it's pricey because a little salad is 14 euros. I find that pricey.
Yeah.
There's also a restaurant, a real sit-down restaurant in the cafe that, in the museum,
yeah.
which I've never actually eaten in, but apparently is very nice. But it's, again, you can imagine, I would assume that lunch is about 30 euros or something like that.
Yeah.
But if you go out the museum, there's a big esplanade and there's a stand there. But when you go up the little street that's right there, it's a street called Bellechasse, Rue Bellechasse, which will take you to where the metro or where the buses, most of the buses are. You have a whole series of little snack places. There, take it out, or you can sit inside that have quiche, that have sandwiches, that have salads. And right on the corner, right across the street from the museum is a very nice cafe brasserie, chic, obviously. We are in a government building in very, very chic area. But you do have access to various places to eat.
To eat right
and
there.
If you go all the way up Bellechasse, you come to the corner of Boulevard Saint-Germain. And you have a big bakery and you have a few other stores like that there. So you can get things you can always get a sandwich and come and sit on the steps of the esplanade. You can always go across and sit or stand by the banks of the river. If you want to do that, you don't have to worry about whether or not you can just eat inside the hotel.
Restaurant.
I'm ready for something inside the museum. And in that case, what you have to do is be very careful to make sure you keep your ticket to be able to go back in.
Go back in, yes.
Unless you decide that you're just going to do it and then you go out and get something to eat.
Yeah.
Because that's really what you have to do.
Very good.
There are even bicycles that you can rent and bring you up to the museum.
But not inside the museum.
No.
Obviously.
Obviously, Annie. Obviously. No.
You never know.
Although you have to, talking about bicycles were only invented at the end of the 19th century. And one of the very first people to make any kind of artwork was Toulouse-Lautrec.
There you go.
Who did posters of bicycles. Bicycle chains and Simpson bicycles. And so bicycles are part of the painting of the 19th century. So,
very good.
If you want to see your Monets, Manets, Renoirs, and all this wonderful sculpture, and be delighted by this part of Paris because it is absolutely exquisite as well, don't forget that the only thing to do is either get there very, very early, or, like with a lot of other places, go around 1 o'clock in the afternoon when there seems to be a lull because people have either stopped coming in or they're running off to get some lunch. And that way it may be a little bit easier and you don't have to stand online, or do as we suggested at the beginning and simply buy your ticket online ahead of time. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to have to cut you off. We've been talking a long time again.
I would like to talk about painting some more, please.
Some other day.
Okay.
You'll get to... Did you really want to talk some more about the painting?
No, not today.
Not today. Okay.
No.
We'll
talk about Monet. One day I want to do Monet.
Okay. We will do that.
You let me?
I will let you. I will be happy to.
Thank you, Annie.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I would like to remind you to go check out our Facebook page, Join Us in France on Facebook, and our YouTube channel, the Join Us in France Travel Podcast. Thank you very much. We will talk to you next week.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.